Fort Carson burned under a merciless sun, heat bending the air above the training field until faces wavered like mirages. Boots chewed gravel, sweat stung eyes, orders cracked through the dust. General Elias Thornton walked the line with metronome, patience and a hammer's edge, noting every hitch, every breath out of rhythm. One cadence snagged. Private Lena Caldwell, sharpshooter, fast learner, kept glancing past the berm toward Pikes Peak, as if the mountain held a clock only she could. Here, he barked her name. She snapped back, jaw clenched, focus forced. Rifles rose, dropped, locked. The drill ground on. Yet small tells flashed, a miscount on push-ups, a lip bite, a flinch when the range tower speaker popped. Training ended with a final shout. Helmets came off, laughter cracked open. Caldwell skipped the noise, signed out, and peeled away alone. A small canvas bag pinned to her ribs like a secret. Thornton should have returned to his office, 2 schedules, 2 numbers that couldn't bleed. Instead, he watched her reach the gate, pause, and swallow hard, as if steadying against something invisible. Curiosity wasn't in the manual. Neither was walking after a subordinate down Nelson Boulevard, while shadows lengthened in thunderheads. Stacked over the front range, he followed anyway, 20 paces back, shoes quiet, cap pulled low. She moved fast, cutting through dry heat past the motor pool's fence, past a bus stop where 2 privates argued about weekend duty. At the crosswalk, she stalled, fingers white around the strap. The bag thumped once against her side. He saw the corner of a photograph tucked under the zipper. Panic touched his throat. She stepped into town. He danced with her, breaching the thin line between command and conscience. What he saw next would shatter everything he thought he knew about. His soldier reveille sliced the dim hallway before sunrise, ringing through Fort Carson's barracks with a steel edge that slid beneath blankets and snapped spines straight. General Elias Thornton was already upright, boots aligned square beneath his bunk. Shirt crisp, mind running the day's sequence like a range timer. Outside, Pikes Peak held a pale crown, while wind moved dry over parking lots dotted with tan trucks and trailers. First formation congealed near the motor pool, silhouettes sharpening. As the sky bled from violet to hard blue, Thornton walked the line with that tight, economical stride every soldier recognized. Eyes skimming name tapes, chins, hands, bootlaces, the little tells that betray discipline or drift. Check spacing, cover down, shave the chatter. He said, voice, even and cold. Sergeant Ramirez took cadence for the run, and they spilled onto Nelson Boulevard in 2 columns that made the pavement thrum. Breath steamed, then vanished as heat rose. Caldwell held the right file, gait smooth, arms slicing air. She looked ready, yet her eyes kept sliding toward the mountains, as if some private clock pulsed behind those ridgelines. Ramirez barked. The formation thundered back, and Thornton logged one more detail he could not name. At 0630, the PT test lanes opened. Push-ups hit the dust in clean rows. Counted reps bounced between scorers and soldiers like hard rubber. Down. 1. Down. 2. Caldwell matched the calls. Jaw set, shoulders steady, pace controlled. Only once did she miscount. A tiny stutter on the number that she corrected without prompting. Thornton's stare found her anyway. The rest of the company felt it and sharpened their form a notch. After the run, they moved to the range. Hung in the air, bitter and familiar, safety on, muzzles down. Sequence on my command, an NCO shouted. Bolts snapped forward, charging handles racked. Magazines seated with a convincing thunk. The clatter traveled across the lanes like hail on sheet metal. Thornton drifted behind firing points, saying little, recording everything. Caldwell handled her weapon with measured grace. Cheek weld tight, sight picture clean, squeeze smooth, follow through crisp. Her first string scored solidly. The second string tightened. Then a speaker on the tower popped, and her shoulders flinched before settling again. She recovered, still strong, still precise, but the reflex lived, a hairline crack visible to anyone who knew where to look. Correct your posture, Thornton, said to the soldier beside her, but his gaze stayed fixed on Caldwell's profile. Studying the way her focus fought some unseen tug, mid-morning brought squad drills through plywood rooms. Stack left. Breach. Boots thudded, hinges squealed, and sim rounds snapped paint against plywood. Caldwell flowed through the door, posted cleared corners, called positions with a clear voice, cycling through rep after rep until sweat traced dusty tracks down her temples. Between runs, she stilled, fingers worrying a glove strap once, then stopping as if catching herself mid-thought. At chow, the mess hall steamed with eggs, hash, and coffee, dark enough to stand a spoon. Soldiers crowded tables, traded stories, and laughed too loudly. Caldwell ate at the end of a bench, back straight, spoon moving with mechanical rhythm. She checked her phone only once, screen canted away from light, mouth slipping tight for a heartbeat before she returned it to her pocket. Thornton, tray in hand, moved behind her without breaking stride, said nothing, filed the moment with other small truths, punctuality, clean boots, near-perfect scores, and that persistent drift in her focus that no reprimand had shaken loose. Afternoon heat came down hard, flattening shadows and thickening air. On the obstacle course, the rope burned palms and humbled egos. Caldwell powered up, rang the bell, descended hand over hand, then waited half a second longer than necessary. Before moving to the wall, Thornton saw the pause, slight as a skipped beat in a march, and locked it away. Corrected another soldier's foot placement, adjusted a harness, and kept the machine grinding. He believed in repetition because repetition builds reflex, and reflex under stress keeps people breathing. Emotions had their place, but not on his training calendar. When storm clouds began stacking over the front range, the air smelled like hot copper and dust. The company formed on the yard for after-action notes, boots pressing crescents into baked earth. Thornton read scores, cited errors, and recognized improvements with no wasted syllables. Small habits save lives, he said. Button your straps. Maintain intervals. Protect your battle rhythm. No shortcuts. Faces shone with grit and pride. Caldwell stood in the third row, hands clasped behind her back, gaze fixed straight ahead, expression schooled into a mask that gave nothing away. He dismissed them. Chatter rose like bees shaken from a hive, backpacks swung, helmets clacked. Caldwell signed out, tucked a small canvas bag beneath her arm, drifted toward the gate alone, slipping past jokes and invitations as if words could not stick to her. The rules said what he should do next. He had paperwork waiting, an operations brief at 1700, a resource fight brewing over ammo allocations, and an email thread that needed a clean, fast answer. He walked to his office because duty comes first, always. Maintenance logs waited with grease fingerprints along the top edge. Training matrices glowed red in places that should have been green. A leave request clashed with an exercise scheduled for next week. He initialed, approved, and denied. He sent 3 emails that used strong verbs and no adjectives. Framed. Photograph on the shelf caught him as he turned. His daughter on commissioning day. Visor throwing sunlight, a silver bar blazing against fresh cloth. He felt the familiar ache of distance, measured in birthdays, collected over video calls, and dinners postponed by deployments. He closed the door on that memory, then opened the next file. Still, the image of Caldwell looking past the berm refused to leave. He replayed her pause on the rope, the miscount, the flinch at the tower pop, the phone at lunch, the bag carried like a fragile thing. None of those broke the rules. Taken together, they made a shape he recognized from earlier in his career when a good soldier burned out just beyond his sight line. He told himself he would address it at morning formation, document the concerns, point her to resources, and move on. The clock rolled toward an evening. Outside, shadows lengthened. The base settled into that steady hum that comes after hard work. Laugh at a picnic table, a radio from a maintenance bay, the hiss of a bus kneeling by the stop. Thornton stepped into the hallway and felt the day's heat easing off the walls. He walked toward the gate, telling himself he wanted air. That was true. It was not the whole truth. Beyond the fence, Colorado Springs gathered headlights like a string of white beads. He saw Caldwell half a block down Nelson Boulevard, shoulders slightly hunched, bag tight to her ribs, cap brim low. She moved like someone late to somewhere important, not reckless, just bent forward by urgency. He watched her hesitate at the crosswalk, steady herself with a breath, and step off the curb when the signal changed. He could have called her name, could have invented a reason to put her back on the sidewalk and inside his system, where checklists and signatures at least offered rails. He did not. He matched her pace from the opposite side of the street, using parked cars and deepening light as cover. The smell of watered lawns replaced hot asphalt. Sprinklers ticked in a steady rhythm. Cyclists whisked by, chain humming. Two privates argued quietly near a bus bench about weekend duty, neither noticing the quiet choreography unfolding 10 yards away. Thornton kept 5 car lengths behind, scanning as habit demanded. An idling sedan, an open garage, a door half shut over a lit hallway, a dog straining a leash. Nothing flagged him. Only the knot under his sternum tightened a notch each time Caldwell adjusted the strap on her bag or checked her phone with that compressed frown. Thunder rolled across the Front Range, a low warning that never quite became. Rain's streetlights blinked awake in a staggered line. Voices from a basketball court carried briefly and fell away. Caldwell paused at another intersection as the signal flashed red. She blinked hard, lifted a hand to her temple as if chasing a headache, then looked down at the canvas bag and pulled it closer. Thornton stopped behind a parked truck, cap brim shading his face. A count ticked past in his head. More step would push him beyond supervision into intrusion. He had crossed smaller lines today, observations unsaid. A walk taken without purpose he could justify on paper, but this was different. Protocol keeps order. Leaders also keep people. Both statements were true, and tonight they argued inside. His chest like rival cadences. The light changed. She moved, turned left, toward a strip where a community center, laundromat, and diner glowed like small lighthouses. He followed at the same patient distance, breath even, expression flat, mind alert. The day had opened with drills and rules. It was closing with a quieter test that no manual covered. Caldwell never looked back. Thornton never announced himself. He kept her in sight, unease riding his shoulder like an extra rank he had not. Asked to where, and in that steady, silent decision, he set the stage for whatever truth waited beyond the next block. Fading light washed Colorado Springs in muted fire as Elias Thornton kept Lena Caldwell in view, 20 paces back, moving along a corridor of modest homes with tidy fences, chalked sidewalks, low porches, and mailboxes tilted from years of wind. Sprinklers ticked like metronomes on brittle lawns, releasing a mineral scent that mixed with asphalt still breathing out the day's heat. The mountains stood in layered blue, a sawtooth wall beyond roofs and power lines. And the last sun ran silver along the ridges before sliding away. Traffic thinned to a hush, just tires whispering, a distant motorcycle, the occasional dog bark, that bounced once and quit. Caldwell's backpack sagged from one shoulder, heavy enough to twist her posture slightly. She adjusted the strap, exhaled, and kept a pace that said late but not reckless. Thornton matched it on the opposite side. Of the street, cap brim low, steps soft, eyes grazing windows, alleys, hedges, patterns. He had spent a career reading terrain and faces. Now, he read the small terrain of a single evening and one soldier's silhouette. Seeking a truth he could not name without breaking something he valued more than titles, boundaries. He told himself he was here for readiness, for safety, for the team. He knew that was only part of it. Something in her stillness at noon had pressed a thumb on his chest and left a bruise he could feel even now. They passed a corner store glowing like a tiny harbor, its glass door taped with flyers for yard sales and lost cats. A teenage clerk wiped a counter while a radio murmured an old country song. Caldwell paused at the window as if deciding then, moved on, pushing past the pull of candy bars and soda toward a block trimmed with cottonwoods. Leaves rattled, catching low light like coins. Mother lifted a toddler from a car seat. A delivery driver snapped a photo of a box at a stoop and disappeared. Everyone occupied small missions. Caldwell's remained locked behind a straight. Back and steady gait that, to Thornton, looked practiced, like a march built to stop questions before they started. He felt guilt arrive without permission, quiet but insistently present, the way a draft slips under a door. Every academy lecture on privacy and trust seemed to rise from memory and line up along the curb. Saluting the rule, he had stepped around. He could turn back, file notes, invite her into his office tomorrow, ask the standard list, and refer her to the right people. Yet the image of her flinch at the range and the pause on the rope threaded through those options and unraveled them, because none of those answers would reach whatever waited beyond this block, and waiting might cost more than he was willing to wager. He breathed once, slow, and stayed with her shadow. Caldwell reached a four-way stop and halted at the curb. With her free hand she rubbed at her eyes, a fast, rough swipe that left a bright smear across the skin. The gesture was not dramatic. It was private, almost hidden, the kind of thing a person does when they believe no one is watching. From the slack zipper of the backpack, she pulled a photograph, edges curled, surface scuffed by time and fingers. She looked at it the way people look through glass at a life on the other side. Her thumb drifted along a corner. Thornton could not see faces from his angle, only the faded rectangle haloed by streetlight. When the signal flipped to walk, she tucked it away, squared her shoulders, and continued. The neighborhood opened toward a small commercial strip stitched between houses, a laundromat smelling of warm detergent, taqueria with a bell that chimed on every door swing, a dental office dark behind blinds, and a brick community center, lit by fluorescent panels buzzing like trapped insects. Caldwell crossed toward the brick building, hesitated, then pushed through the glass door. Thornton stood between two parked cars long enough to measure what this choice meant. He had followed her into town. Stepping closer would move him from watcher to trespasser. He cinched the knot again. Protocol on one side, duty on the other, and threaded between them. A simple human concern that refused to be ordered into a neat line. He drifted to the entrance and read the bulletin board through the glass. ESL classes. A veterans yoga night. A flyer for rent assistance with a tear-off number already missing 3 tabs, childcare hours and family counseling hours. The lobby smelled like floor cleaner and old books and carried a softness he associated with churches and libraries. He did not go inside. He found a bench beneath a bulletin board window, a spot where he could observe corners and doors reflected. Across the glass, like a quiet map, Caldwell spoke at the front desk briefly, then disappeared down a corridor lined with posters about stress, nutrition, mortgages, and reunions. Thornton checked the time and let his shoulder blades settle against painted brick. The hallway hid her, yet he felt her presence as clearly as if she were across a briefing table. He could leave. He did not. The bench was cold, even through the uniform fabric. Electric light flattened the dusk outside into a matte blue. He studied his hands and saw the small white scars that tools and winters leave, markers of years that had asked for steadiness and received it. He thought about his daughter again, not as a photograph, but as a voice on a bad connection saying she had solved a problem without him. And he had said he was proud and meant it, and also felt something else he refused to name. Noise rose from deeper in the building. A ball on a gym floor, sneakers squealing, a whistle, then laughter. A moment later, a softer sound flowed under the door to his right. The low cadence of a counselor's voice, followed by a reply that tightened his throat even before words resolved into meaning. Caldwell sat with her back to him, across a thin wall. He could hear enough to know, not enough to pretend ignorance. "I'm keeping it together," she said, voice bent, but not broken. "I have to. If I stop, everything stops." The counselor, woman with a calm, practiced tone, asked about sleep, about food, about support. Caldwell's answers were simple, shaped into soldierly brevity. A few hours, whatever is easy, not much. Paper rustled. A pen clicked. The community center lights buzzed while Elias Thornton waited near the glass, posture rigid, breath even, attention snagging on echoes. Down the corridor, a vent rattled, a basketball thumped, and shoes squealed across polished wood like alarms. From nowhere tonight, Lena Caldwell spoke behind a thin wall, voice controlled, then tightening around phrases that felt like barbs in skin anyway. He refused to press his ear closer, yet fragments leaked outward. Small pieces shaped like facts, sharper than lectures remembered. A question flowed, then thoughtful silence. Then her whisper carrying anchors he would not forget. Promise, and not enough time. Paper rustled somewhere. A pen clicked twice. His conscience tightened, like cold wind sliding stubbornly under the collar that night. A hinge creaked, footsteps neared, and lobby lights shifted as a door opened and Lena stepped into the cooling. Dusk outside. She carried a small journal, a pamphlet folded into quarters, a backpack slung low like a weight dragging at bone all day. The receptionist smiled and nodded. Polite words passed emptily. Then the street swallowed Lena's outline, and the hinge complained softly. Air tasted of damp dust and cut grass from sprinklers, while a distant bass hum rolled like patient. Surf west. She moved toward the park, neither hurrying nor drifting, measuring blocks with disciplined strides that concealed exhaustion under habit learned. Modest houses squared themselves beneath cottonwoods. Porch bulbs glowed against metal, then dropped back, resigned to evening. Sky bled from copper toward ink around the teeth of the Front Range as Thornton shadowed her across reflections calmly. He crossed when she crossed, paused when she paused, using ordinary movement like camouflage rather than corners thick with darkness. A chain on the park gate swung and sang, a thin metallic note that answered every teasing breath of wind. Lena slipped inside and chose a bench beneath a cottonwood whose bark ran in furrows gray as weathered rope today. She set the backpack down, unzipped it, and lifted a journal whose corners were frayed and spine bowed from use. Her pen hovered above an empty line, knuckles blanched. Then ink stitched sentences quickly like field repairs done under pressure. Thornton stopped near a lamppost, pretending to check his phone while lamplight mapped leaves on glass and shadows patterned pavement. Her hand trembled, steadied, trembled again, a small electrical storm traveling wrist to shoulder before discipline pinned it flat hard. The bass hum thickened behind insects and far traffic, a low engine that never stopped, fabric of the town. Breathing. Freight train called from the south, horn long and mournful, sound-bending air between neighborhoods before thinning above rooftops. Wind cooled and carried diner grease, laundry sweetness, and hose water, mixing scents into something both homely and unsettling tonight. Grass whispered while plastic slides clicked as they cooled. Somebody laughed on a porch, then cut the sound short abruptly. She wrote, paused, pinched the bridge of her nose, resumed. Lines curling with insistence that looked like stubborn survival work. Moonlight rose chalky from the east, revealing shadows beneath her eyes, a split lower lip, and a jaw muscle twitching. Thornton let thoughts wander along trails he usually blocked, seeing himself young, fervent, certain that checklists solved everything back then. Age-sanded corners once defended like bunkers, and ranks shoved him into rooms where slides met people and crumpled messily. His daughter appeared not as a portrait, but as windshield glare during rushed farewells. Promises deferred toward another plausible tomorrow. Excellence had excused absence. Outcomes had justified costs. Until quiet acknowledgments hardened into distance he pretended was necessary for years. Watching Lena, he felt that arithmetic failed, an equation misbalancing because the unknowns were human, not tidy variables at all. Leaves clattered like dry applause above her bench. The journal lay open while lines multiplied and ink deepened page after page. She searched the backpack, produced a worn photograph, and set it beside. The journal, anchoring it with a cap gently. Under lamplight, a boy grinned, front tooth chipped, hair standing crooked. Sunlight washing one cheek until it flared pale silver. Her fingertip traced his outline, then hovered. Her lips moved without volume. Private conversation continued against gathering blue quietly. The bass murmured steadier, a reminder that the machine never sleeps, turning fuel and training into readiness, while families wait. He shifted weight from an aching knee, recognized the ledger of time, then corrected himself, knowing choices. Carved deeper scars. Memory offered a staff sergeant who hid a sick parent through deployment. Relief arriving late, consequences already etched homeward forever. He had missed signs then, and the old question returned, voiced in the dry register reserved for private audits nightly. Maybe he disliked her performance dip because it disrupted tidy charts. After all, columns were easier than the ongoing context. For him, a scooter clattered past the entrance, wheels rattling over seams. An elderly couple circled slowly. A dog investigated, then left. She closed the journal, pressed a palm against the cover, breathed deliberately, and slid both pages, and the photograph back inside. Her hands shook harder once free. She rubbed warmth into her fingers, her eyes brightened. Her shoulders squared against everything rising inside quietly. He almost stepped forward, an urge to offer transport or guidance flaring, then checked. Himself, understanding that timing governs reception completely, cloud scraps smudged the horizon. Stars pricked through clearings. From the base, a thin bugle call stretched and faded westward. He wondered which definition of duty kept Lena upright tonight, which pledge pushed her forward even when strength thinned badly. Her phone rattled against the bench like an insect. She froze, flipped the screen, and fear washed color from her skin. She answered immediately, voice compressed, fighting panic while remaining respectful. She listened, eyes locked, breath cutting. "In shallow pieces there. I am coming," she said. "Please keep him there. I am coming now." Words stripped to muscle and motion only. The journal jammed halfway into the pack. The zipper snagged. She swore softly, tried again, then slung it open anyway. The photograph skated across slats, almost falling. She snatched it, shoved it beneath the flap, and launched straight into motion. Thornton moved as well, quick without, announcing pursuit, choosing the sidewalk outside the fence while she cut across damp grass. The gate chain slapped iron and chirped. Boots hammered pavement. Cadence accelerated beyond exhaustion, powered by fear's bitter fuel reserves. He passed the community center again, hearing the door creak lonely, a flyer flapping against the glass like a tired bird. Bass hum deepened until it braided with his pulse, an undertow reminding him that choices tonight carried consequences tomorrow. Lena checked both directions at the corner, turned toward the avenue where bus routes gathered, and broke into a sprint. Streetlights painted alternating bars across her back, bright then dark, like shutters clicking while she chased something impossibly urgent ahead. Thornton lengthened his stride, heart heavy, breath controlled, questions rising like weather. Wondering how far leadership should reach right now? What promise ruled her choices? What clock had slipped? And who might answer if the scale finally tipped against mercy? He pushed onward behind her through the neighborhood night, uneasy, determined, knowing discovery waited ahead and everything would change soon. Streetlights thinned into a tired scatter as Elias Thornton followed Lena Caldwell past shuttered shops and a pawn sign that flickered like a failing heartbeat, toward a low apartment block scarred with peeling paint and hairline cracks. Sidewalk ran broken, edges jagged where weeds pushed through concrete seams, and a dented mailbox leaned at the curb like an elder too stubborn to sit. A rusted bike frame chained to a rail clinked when the wind shifted, and somewhere a television bled canned laughter through walls, too thin to keep anyone's life private. Lena crossed the lot, stepped around a pothole trying to become a pond, and shouldered through a door whose closer groaned before the latch caught. Thornton held back in the dim, pretending to check a message while scanning for light. A second-floor window glowed with the kind of wattage chosen when bills are counted. With a pencil, minutes later, she reappeared, quick steps carrying a canvas tote toward the corner store. He shadowed her past a dumpster that smelled of old bread and hot plastic and watched her buy milk. Bananas, bread, soup, and a pharmacy bag hidden deep before cash slid across a scratched counter. The bell above the door gave a defeated ring. When she left, and he watched her carry that weight upstairs without wasting a second. From the landing, he saw numbers stenciled in flaking paint, and her shadow crossing a thin curtain. He took the long way around and found a patch of darkness beneath a tree whose leaves shivered whenever passing cars pushed air like slow waves, then fixed his gaze on a narrow window half open to the night. Inside, a small room revealed thrift. Furniture, a sagging couch, and a lamp with a crooked shade trying to hold back shadows. Lena set the tote on a counter and moved with practiced efficiency, even as her shoulders sagged. Water ran, Pots knocked, the microwave hummed. And then a cough sounded from deeper inside. Small at first, then longer, a thread pulled too hard. She returned, guiding a boy who looked 10, pale and thinner than any child should be. He wore a superhero shirt faded to ghost tones, hair kicked up at defiant angles and eyes rimmed with deep smudges. Lena adjusted a pillow and settled him on the couch, one arm behind his shoulders. Touch protective, the kind that says, "I will stand between you and the storm." The lamp flickered, buzzed, steadied. The boy's breath rasped lightly, turning the room into a place where every sound mattered. Thornton felt his breath catch. He had expected a roommate, a partner, perhaps a parent, not a child, whose ribs lifted like slow wings. She opened the pharmacy bag, shook pills from an orange bottle, read the directions twice, filled a cup, and knelt. Her voice softened into something warm and bright he had never heard on the field. "Small sips, Jonah," she said, and the name landed with the finality of a gavel. He swallowed, grimaced, and tried a brave smile that found only tired relief. She brushed hair from his forehead, then checked a chart taped to the fridge, marking a time with a stubborn ballpoint. Soup warmed, steam rose. The cheap lamp popped, dimmed, and came back, throwing a halo around dust motes that spun like jarred snow. Jonah coughed again, thin and persistent, a saw slicing soft wood. Lena rubbed circles on his back. Her face did not crack, though effort etched itself at the corners of her mouth. Thornton thought of field manuals stacked on his desk, pages full of clarity that could not survive this room. He leaned against rough bark while a neighbor's radio lost a ball game to static and water-hammered ancient pipes upstairs. Landed on a tray, she blew across the spoon, tested the heat against her wrist, and fed him with patience that looked born, not learned. "You eat more," he whispered, paper dry. "Later," she promised, smile quick, eyes dim. After a few bites, he leaned back, breath easing only when another pillow propped his shoulders. She sorted envelopes with deliberate care. Hospital logos and clinic stamps vied with a nonprofit's payment plan dressed as kindness, and a bright red final notice glared from one corner. Her exhale was not a sigh, more a careful release shaped like a prayer. She checked a notes app, packed with lists, pressed the phone to her ear, and lowered her voice until the edges felt ironed flat. "Yes, I can work nights," she said. "The extra shift helps. Please keep his appointment. I'm arranging transport." A pause then. "A thank you, careful enough to carry dignity through a wire." Jonah's eyes had that alert shine, carried by kids who learned to read a room faster than adults. He hit a wince when he shifted and reached for the remote. Lena handed it over with a flourish, and a cartoon clicked alive. Colors saturated, sound low, a tide lapping at a tired shore. The apartment smelled of soup, laundry soap, and the heat that old buildings keep after sunset. While a fan turned lazily in the corner, clicking once each rotation like a metronome set for endurance. On the sill, a jar of dandelions leaned toward a dusted screen. Thornton watched her tuck a blanket around Jonah's knees in silence, a calendar alert that tried to command her next hour. Her shoulders dropped a fraction, exposing fatigue. No. Formation could cure. Admiration rose uninvited, followed by guilt heavy enough to change his weight on the soil. He had measured her against standards built for people who sleep 8 hours and share burdens across wide hands. She moved through a world where duties stacked like crates and one pair of arms carried them all because nobody else could. Aunt Mariah left another apology for asking again, then spoke to dispatch about a late run at the diner near Tijan and Las Amias. "Yes, I can cover the graveyard," she said. "Yes, I'll finish by 06. I will be on time for PT. Thank you." After hanging up, she opened a brown envelope, unfolded a statement, and whispered numbers like curses she refused to waste breath on. "We'll make it," she told Jonah, and he nodded like a recruit receiving orders he trusts. The stove clock blinked nonsense. She reset it with a firm finger, set 2 alarms on her phone, and scanned a calendar tacked behind the door. A battlefield. Of inked squares and arrows, sticky notes read, "Call the counselor about the paperwork, and ask the captain about the schedule swap." Something inside Thornton loosened and tightened at once, respect and shame colliding with unfamiliar force. He could not unsee the tremor when she signed a check or the line that deepened between her brows while she placed coins carefully into a jar. He tried to remember his most recent words to her and wondered whether any landed like small stones. She cleaned the kitchen with military speed, packed a lunch for tomorrow, and checked the school backpack with such tender thoroughness the act felt ceremonial. Jonah drowsed. Cartoon credits rolled under the lamp that fought the room for brightness, the bulb flickering and casting stuttering shadows across her cheekbones. A neighbor knocked once and asked through the door if the sink backed up again. She said that it was fine. Then her phone rang, the clinic's late line glowing on the screen. Thornton shifted closer, half ashamed of curiosity, half unable to look away. "Yes, this is Caldwell," she said. "I'm confirming the payment plan. I can bring cash from my shift." "No, I do not want to cancel. Please keep us on the list." Silence, then a thank you that sounded like endurance hammered into syllables. She rested her forehead against a cupboard door and let it stay there a moment. Jonah coughed again, a fragile sound that hurt to hear. She was beside him before the echo faded, holding the cup, smoothing the blanket, murmuring a story that blended dinosaurs and rockets into gentle nonsense until his eyelids sagged. Training ground gravel seemed to crunch beneath Thornton's feet even here, as if the day refused to release its grip. He thought about leadership the way he had defined it for decades, then watched that definition widen to include quieter acts. Nobody saluted. She fought on two fronts without relief and still showed for formation. Still cut a path through drills. Still kept a smile close enough for a sick child to borrow. He saw the arithmetic now, brutal and exact. Soldier by day, caretaker by night, all of it held together by grit and a ledger that punished mercy. At last, she turned off the television, kissed Jonah's temple, and sat at the table with a pile of envelopes again. Her pen hovered, then moved, writing a number he knew she could not spare. Wind shifted. Chimes tinkled on a balcony. Siren moaned far off on the highway while the lamp steadied and the fan clicked on, faithful as a sentry. Lena exhaled once, long and slow, then whispered a vow he barely caught. "I promised," she said. "I promised I would keep him safe." A small card slid from the stack, handwritten with ours for a support office and a counselor's name. She tucked it into the journal, zipped the bag, and checked the locks twice. Jonah slept, breath shallow, but even. She rested a hand over his chest and counted rises like a medic. Thornton stood very still and accepted what the night had shown. Without ornament, without defense. He felt admiration like heat and guilt like weight. Felt resolve forming, simple and unambiguous. What would you sacrifice for someone you love? Drop a comment to let us know you're not alone. Through the window, he watched her square her shoulders and prepare for another shift. He understood at last that she balanced soldier duties with caring for her brother, and that tomorrow demanded more from him than a sharper reprimand or a tidy speech. Night pressed close around the rundown complex while Elias Thornton waited in shadow. Listening to the fan rasp behind the thin window and the hush that follows cartoons when a child finally sleeps, a rideshare rolled in, headlights skimming. Chipped paint. Lena stepped out with a backpack and the same canvas bag, locked the door, tested the knob twice, then moved toward Tejan with shoulders tight and a pace meant for distance. He followed at a drift, careful as wind, keeping two hedges and parked cars, giving her enough space to feel alone. Above Colorado Springs, a clear dome spread, stars pricking the dark. The mountains reading as deeper shapes against deeper blue. The street smelled of cooling asphalt, laundry from Vince, and last orders browning on a grill. A bus stopped, then labored away. At the corner, she raised a hand, and a sedan with a cracked taillight pulled over. Thornton flagged a second car and told the driver to trail. Lanes slid beneath them in pale bands, while sodium lamps painted everything amber. At Memorial's entrance, the first sedan released Lena. She paid, thanked the driver, and crossed. Toward the sliding doors that breathed antiseptic air. Automatic glass parted. Cold fluorescent light replaced night. A security officer lifted a hand when Thornton drifted too near the restricted double doors. He settled near the gift shop, watching reflections more than faces, unwilling to intrude, yet unable to let her vanish. Lena signed forms with cramped letters, clipped a visitor badge to her collar, and stepped into an elevator with a tired volunteer and a man with wilted flowers. She pressed floor 5. Thornton waited a minute, rode up and entered a corridor, painted a color disguised as calm. Machines beeped in asynchronous rhythms. Nurses moved like quiet water, quick and precise, voices low. Through the glass, he saw Jonah elevated on a narrow bed, chest rising in shallow lifts. Tubing looped from a pump to a small hand taped down. Lena tucked a blanket, sat and gathered a book as if the act itself could stitch the world together. She read softly, mouth close to the boy's ear, voice steady until a word snagged, then steady again. Her free hand cupped his shoulder. She glanced at the monitor the way a pilot checks gauges while pretending to be calm. Jonah opened his eyes, found her, drifted back, lashes trembling. When a cough shook him, she counted under her breath, rubbed. Circles waited out the storm, kissed his temple, and resumed the line exactly where she had paused.
Ow.
Thornton leaned against the cool wall and felt heat behind his ribs that no rank ever shields. He had watched bodies lifted from ranges and helicopters, push sky with one more soul than gravity preferred, yet nothing matched this. A soldier reading through fear to a boy who needed that sound more than sleep. The clock moved in slow clicks. He tracked routines the way he once mapped fields of fire. Lena masked fatigue before the staff, then let it show only after their steps faded. She breathed with the machine during rough patches, drank from a paper cup, and returned to the same page after realizing she had read without memory. He thought of his daughter, not as a shining frame on a shelf, but as a young woman waiting. Outside a gate because a late flight had swallowed their dinner. He had texted a promise he believed. She had answered, "It's okay," and he had accepted a mercy he hadn't earned. The memory hurt. He let it. Physician entered, checked charts. Adjusted a drip, made notes, and nodded toward Lena with practiced kindness. Words floated, counts, numbers, terms that meant prognosis, if you could decode them. Lena listened like an NCO taking orders, asked 2 questions, and whispered thanks. When the doctor left, she bowed her head to Jonah's knuckles for 3. Beats then straightened and kept reading. The monitor steadied, a fragile metronome, convincing everyone to endure. Minutes slid toward an hour. Thornton stayed. Emails aged. Briefs shifted without him. None of it outweighed what anchored him here. Leadership included a witness. Janitor's cart squeaked past, leaving the lemon bite of cleanser, an intercom. Requested a respiratory therapist for the ICU. The world kept grinding. Lena set the book aside and told a story from memory about a cardboard rocket and a brave pilot who steered by stars and always landed near home. Her voice soothed. Gathered, one escaped. She wiped it, kissed Jonah's hair, and smiled with stubborn gentleness that built a bridge over fear. Thornton understood the point of discipline, to hold you upright while the heart renegotiates itself. He also felt the limits of forms and the emptiness of speeches written without rooms like this in mind. Guilt rose for every sharp word that had missed the life behind her uniform. Admiration settled beside it. Near to a nurse encouraged rest. Lena nodded and dozed beside the bed, hands still on the blanket, ready to wake at a twitch. Thornton thought of messages from his daughter he had ignored because morning came early and missions outranked calls. He had called it mentorship. Standing. Here he heard the lie inside that comfort. The monitors cleared their throats. Lena rose at once, adjusted tubing with a nurse, whispered praise into Jonah's ear like a prayer, and pointed at glow stars on the ceiling, a child's galaxy made of plastic hope. The boy tracked them with a ghost of a smile. Real constellations pressed cold through the windows. At last, a resident wrote an update, promised a reassessment at dawn, and suggested a break. Lena hesitated, then nodded. She squeezed Jonah's hand and promised to return before daylight reached the blinds. She stepped into the corridor, spine straight, eyes rimmed red. Thornton shrank into shadow, unsure whether to speak, unable to earn the right. She passed without seeing him, drawn by the need to breathe air without bleach and plastic. Elevators delivered her to the lobby. He followed far behind, footsteps lost in machine buzz and the hush hospitals cultivate to keep panic caged. Outside, cool air hit like a wake-up slap. The lot stretched in pale squares under lamps that hummed. Beyond the roofline, Orion tilted over the city. Lena crossed 3 bays, stopped beside a cart corral and tried to stand still. Her shoulders hitched. She pressed both hands to her eyes as if holding her skull together. The night answered with silence. A car alarm chirped far away, then fell quiet. The gravel grated under her heel. She inhaled like someone finishing a sprint and then folded at the waist. Not a graceful bend, but a collapse that told the truth about months spent bracing, so others wouldn't see the break. A sound came out of her, raw and low, not loud enough to draw staff, too honest to mistake. Thornton took 1 step, stopped, and felt how useless rank becomes when grief takes the field. He wanted to be father, commander, neighbor, anything that could absorb shock and return strength, but habit held him still because she hadn't asked. So he stood guard at a respectful distance while the parking lot received her sorrow, and the stars watched without blinking. And he swore quietly and for himself that this would not be the end of his understanding. Cold air clung to the hospital lot, lamps humming while the mountains loomed like a darker wall beyond the roofs. Lena Caldwell stood 3 spaces from the entrance, fists to her eyes, and finally broke. The voice that had stayed steady for a child all night cracked into a raw whisper that scraped the quiet. "I'm failing Jonah." Shoulders shook. Breath shuddered like every inhale needed clearance. She bent, caught herself on a bumper, stared at her palms as if they were maps. She could no longer read. Elias Thornton stopped beside a concrete pillar and felt the armor of command go thin as paper. He had seen soldiers freeze on ridgelines and thaw into motion, had briefed families with words polished until they could not cut. Nothing prepared him for this. A soldier under fluorescent hum, apologizing to the air because no one else would. Take the confession. Doors breathed. A gurney rolled past the glass. Somewhere, a siren wound down and died. Lena wiped her face, squared her cap, and dragged the canvas bag tight against her ribs. The uniform looked heavier now, weighted with duty and scarcity. She whispered, "Hold it together," lifted her chin, and turned from the entrance not toward rest, but toward the street, boots tapping a hollow rhythm that joined the lot's empty echo. Thornton followed far enough to let privacy breathe, close enough to keep watch. City light thinned into scattered pockets. A neon coffee cup blinked over a low diner wedged between a tire shop and a motel whose vacancy sign never slept. The window threw a grid of chrome and tile, a cook in a paper hat, a pie carousel turning like a slow clock. Above everything, the black shape of the range stood indifferent and enormous. Lena pushed through the door. The bell rattled. The smell of fry oil and bleach hit hard. She slid behind the counter as if the stool were a starting block, tied on an apron with fingers that trembled, tucked loose hair under her cap, and pulled a pencil from behind her ear. "Evening," she said to a pair of EMTs nursing coffees. Voice ironed flat. Thornton took a booth where he could watch without entering her orbit. Plates hissed on the pass. The clink of flatware made a nervous music. A jukebox glowed without playing. The register's tiny screen showed a green square, blinking like a heartbeat. Lena moved with efficient grace, filling cups, refilling ketchup, wiping rings from formica in perfect circles. The smile she fastened on had no light behind it, yet she kept it in place because customers spend better when the world looks orderly. A trucker ordered the blue plate. A retiree wanted tea with lemon. A college kid asked for pancakes at midnight. She remembered every detail and delivered without delay. Each time she turned from the coffee machine, her hand brushed her phone, the check-in tick of someone who lives in borrowed minutes. Thornton watched her shoulders and heard the faint echo of the parking lot in the way they set and reset with each order. He felt the pull to stand, to name himself, to say something human. Instead, he stayed quiet, because a cornered soldier will treat kindness like a challenge and raise walls. The cook scraped hash across the steel. Metal rasped on. Metal, sparks with no fire. Clock over the register ticked a second hand toward 2. Through the glass, the snowfall wind pushed grit along the curb. A family came in, parents bleary, toddler sugar wild.
Out, Lena.
Crouched to the child's level and turned a spoon into a rocket. The kid giggled. The parents breathed. Thornton saw how she borrowed softness from a place she could not afford to empty, then stood and carried plates with a grace that defied fatigue. The phone vibrated. She flinched, checked the screen, hesitated, and slipped into the hallway by the restrooms. Where a payphone hung like an artifact, Thornton rose and drifted toward a faded poster about allergy protocols. Her voice leaked under the vent, thin and taut. "It's Caldwell. I'm checking on Jonah. I'm at work. Please, any chance?" A pause. Then words dropped like stones in a well. "Worse. Oxygen up. He's asking if I'm coming." She pressed her knuckles to the wall. "Tell him I'll be there before sunrise. Tell him I'm reading the next chapter as soon as I sit." Another pause. "I understand. Thank you." The call ended. She stood still, breathing through her nose like a runner, trapped one step from the tape. The bulb buzzed and flickered, throwing jerky shadows across the tile. Thornton's throat burned. He stepped back before she returned to the booth, pressed his palms against the table until the fake wood grain imprinted his skin. Lena reappeared with eyes that had learned how to hide. She poured coffee until steam fogged her knuckles, rang checks, thanked tips that would vanish into co-pays by noon, and kept that thin smile stapled in place. The EMTs asked about the game. She nodded in the right places. The trucker told a joke. She laughed once, soft and late. The bell chimed, stools creaked, forks sang against plates. Somewhere behind the counter, her phone trembled again. She looked at the room, weighed duty against love, and chose both in the only sequence possible. Serve, step away, listen, return. When she reached the hallway the second time, Thornton stayed put and let sound paint the picture he already feared. "Hello." The long silence. The tiny groan when she heard numbers dip further. Iron in her reply. "I'm coming as soon as relief shows." She returned to the counter and asked the cook for her break, voice polite but edged. The cook, reading her face for the first time all hour, nodded as she pushed through the back door. Night slapped cold across her cheeks. Thornton followed far enough to see her under the loading light, then stopped where words would be choice, not accident. She wrapped both arms around herself and looked up at the black shoulder of the mountain. "Don't take him," she said, the plea barely sounding. "Not him." Thornton felt something crack down the inside of his chest. He thought of his daughter's unanswered texts, the birthdays saved under a folder called later, the pride he had worn like armor that now felt like distance renamed. The neon coffee cup blinked patiently. Inside, plates clattered, customers laughed, and the habit rolled forward on rails. Lena wiped her eyes with the heel of a hand, squeezed the phone, went back in, and moved faster, urgency sharpening every step. Orders stacked. She cleared tables, topped off syrup, and steadied a plate when a patron's elbow wobbled. The phone thrummed one more time. She ducked behind the counter and answered in a crouch. "Respiratory is with him," a nurse said. "We called the attending. We'll update in 20. Lena closed her eyes, said thank you in a voice that sounded like surrender wrapped in courage, and rose. For the first time, the smile slipped. She caught it, rebuilt it, stepped to the register, and rang another check. Thornton stood, paid for coffee he had not touched, and left a tip that felt both necessary and wrong. Wanted to do everything, and knew he could not name it here without stripping her of the pride that kept her upright. She caught his reflection in the pie glass and paused as if a weather change had brushed her skin. He turned slightly so the chrome threw back nothing but light. The clock reached 3 and clicked. Outside, the horizon hinted at the thinnest gray. Thornton understood he was staring at the edge of what she could endure alone, and that the next hour would define them both. As he watched her refill the trucker's mug with hands that would not stop shaking, a sentence came through his head as clear as a radio order pushed through static. "Ever felt like you're carrying the world alone? Share your thoughts below where." Listening, he did not speak it. He held it like a promise to witness and act. Lena set the pot down, leaned on the counter for a breath no one would notice, and whispered to a space only she could see, "Hang on, Jonah." Thornton lowered his head so she would not glimpse the grief in his eyes and mistake it for pity. Then he raised it, squared his shoulders inside a uniform that had never felt heavier, and accepted the simple, devastating truth at last. He had not understood the depth of her struggle until tonight, and it was breaking his heart open in a way command never had. Dawn unstitched the night as Elias Thornton left the hospital district and steered toward Fort Carson, the windshield holding a thin stripe of gold over black ridges. His hands rode the wheel without effort, yet his mind worked like a ranged tower, humming before first fire, replaying the hallway, the beep of a monitor. The way Lena Caldwell's voice softened for a boy who needed courage more than sleep. He had believed leadership was pressure calibrated by rank. Now it felt like witness followed by action. The guard at the gate saluted. The barrier lifted. A cool breath of sage and dust slid across the lot and steadied him. Reveille spilled. From the speaker mast with clean edges, striking flag steel and glass, before falling into gravel that still remembered last night's heat. In his office, he shut the door, ignored the red blocks on the training calendar, and opened a blank message addressed to the brigade chaplain, the military family life counselor, and the Army Community Service Coordinator. Wrote with the spareness he trusted. Need discreet outreach, no delay, soldiers showing cumulative fatigue. Performance otherwise strong, recommend check-in within 24 hours. No administrative drag, confidentiality paramount. Reread, stripped a sentence that felt like pity and hit send. The second note went to Army Emergency Relief, requesting guidance on rapid assistance for medical bills and travel. Names withheld until consent is obtained. The coffee machine clicked. The clock hummed. The mountains beyond the window shifted from bruise to blue. He lifted the photo of his daughter on commissioning day and angled it toward the band of light over Cheyenne Mountain, surprised by the small warmth that rose as if the frame had weight he was finally willing to carry. Outside, boots formed along the motor pool like stitches across a seam, breath ghosted, voices braided into cadence. Thornton walked out with a clipboard he did not need, and a steadiness that felt new. He took his spot, scanned ranks, and saw Caldwell's 3rd Squad uniform exact. Eyes swollen from a night spent paying for every breath with effort. The old reflex, a correction sharpened by decades, lifted inside his chest and then withdrew. He logged facts that honored reality. Present, ready, steady under load. He said, "Heads up," and let the voice carry without steel. Standard holds, so does the team. The line received the message with a quiet that felt like soil accepting rain. Ramirez took them out along Nelson Boulevard, the run rolling under a sky that brightened by degrees. Thornton held the flank, not to hunt errors, but to be close, if anyone's rhythm broke. When a private drifted, he slid there like a bumper. When a corporal flagged, he matched stride until his lungs caught up. Caldwell stayed in tempo, gaze forward, jaw set in that stubborn line he now read as courage instead of defiance. Sun cleared. The ridge and lit everything with that unforgiving honesty the first hour always brings. Back on the field, rifles found racks, canteens rotated, shirts clung. He read the after-action notes with the same economy his unit expected, yet he moved recognition in front of critique so the weight would balance. Good work on room clearing. 2nd platoon. Watch footwork on the ladder. Medical checks today. If you need a slot, see your squad leader. No one falls behind alone. Faces lifted for a heartbeat as if something invisible had eased. Dismissals scattered them toward Chow and the armory. Caldwell turned to leave when he said, "Private Caldwell. Office at 09. Routine touch point." She nodded once, neutral, and moved on. In the hour before that meeting, he worked the quiet network every senior learns. I asked the chaplain to swing through the motor pool mid-morning. He asked a CS to set a counselor table near the classroom. No labels, just presents and coffee. He asked the clinic NCOIC to hold 2 same-day appointments under command referral without names until used. Then he typed a message to his daughter. "I want to visit this month. I can drive." He stared, almost deleted it, and then sent it, accepting the jolt that followed, as proof he still knew how to move first. At 09 Caldwell stepped into his doorway and saluted. At ease, he said, and offered a chair. The office smelled of toner and stale coffee, the day's common perfume. Your scores remain strong. 2 small timing slips yesterday, both corrected. She answered cleanly, sleep inconsistent, motivation high, no injuries. He nodded, slid a card across the desk with 3 numbers written in block print. Standard resources, no obligation, fast response if needed. Share with your team. Her eyes searched his for the catch and found none. That's all, he said. Carry on. She left with a footstep that almost sounded lighter, then tucked the card into a pocket and vanished toward work. Thornton listened to boots scrape the corridor and felt calmer than any briefing could make him. The day gathered speed. He solved a vehicle dispute by asking the motor sergeant where the actual choke point lived and moving a meeting to free a bay. The shop breathed easier. He walked past the counselor table at lunch and watched soldiers drift in for a cookie, then stay. To ask practical questions, nobody wants to raise in formation. Caldwell passed once, then again paused, took a pamphlet with the same neat motion she used to clear a jam, and left without glancing around to see who had noticed. Afternoon threw long cloud bands across Pikes Peak. Training resumed. Caldwell hit the rope, rang the bell, and dropped clean. No pause. Her face still showed the night, yet her movement told a different story. Reserves gathered from somewhere that looked like hope. He surprised himself with a small smile and let it live. Near final formation, he called Ramirez and the first sergeant to his office and framed a pilot for flexible PT windows when family medical appointments collide with duty. Supervisor discretion, no paperwork until patterns appear, and nobody singled out. They traded a look that said the older man is adjusting in a useful way, and nodded because readiness improves when reality gets a say. Before releasing the flag, it cracked above them, and the sky shifted toward amber. We push hard, he said. We also pace for distance. If you need help, ask early. If you're good today, carry a corner for someone else. That is not softness, it is strength. In the third squad, a chin lifted the thickness of a coin. He saw it, pretended not to, and let the moment fold into the larger current so pride could remain intact. When engines cooled and the yard quieted, he walked the lanes alone, gravel crunching. Ravens sliding lazy arcs over the motor pool. Tired, pressed on him in a different shape now. Not depletion, but the ache that follows a change in stride. In the office, nothing looked new except the angle of his daughter's photo. The calendar with more blank space between blocks and a sticky note under the monitor that read, "Remember people, then plans." He wrote a short brief to the brigade on resource visibility, naming no one. Closing with a line he believed even before he finished typing, "We maintain readiness by protecting the humans who provide it." He checked his phone and found a reply. Name the day. Warmth moved through him as steady as sunrise. He locked the drawer where confidential notes lived, turned off the lamp, and stood outside while the cut grass and cooling metal flavored the air. The flag whispered against the halyard. A door slammed. Laughter ran after it. Somewhere, a bus hissed and settled. He looked toward the field and pictured Caldwell heading for the gate, gear squared, burdens hidden from casual eyes. And he accepted. That help should arrive without spectacle. He made a promise with the same stubbornness he used on long marches. He would help quietly, consistently, and for as long as needed. Letting credit drift away like dust carried by morning wind, he breathed, and felt ready. Who's been a silent hero in your life? Comment below to honor them. October settled over Fort Carson with a hush that felt earned. The parade field rimmed in cottonwoods turned to coins. Leaves spinning along fence lines while morning light gilded Pikes Peak and made every formation look sharper than yesterday. Elias Thornton arrived before colors, coffee cooling on the sill, a list of quiet tasks ready, conviction steady as the flag wrap tapping metal. He called Army Emergency Relief and the spouse's club treasurer, then moved funds without leaving fingerprints. Routing help through a unit account that covered emergencies for anonymous soldiers whose names never appeared on slides. The chaplain agreed to deliver grocery cards as if they came from a seasonal drive. The clinic liaison reserved 2 follow-up slots under a generic code so nobody would ask questions when a young private requested an early appointment. Paperwork? That once felt like armor now looked like a bridge, and he walked across it without ceremony, satisfied only when confirmation emails landed whisper soft in his inbox. The wind carried the smell of cut grass and cold dust when he stepped outside and watched the colors rise. Red and white catching the first burn of the day while bugle calls laced the air. During roll call, he found Lena Caldwell in 3rd Squad. Uniform execs, eyes rimmed by a night that had not forgiven her, posture unbroken anyway. He saw resolve where he had once seen defiance, and something in his chest eased. The way a knot loosens when a rope finally lies the way it should. Instruction followed inspection, and drills unfolded under a sky turning brilliant, clouds thin. As chalk lines above the ranges, Caldwell climbed the rope and rang the bell, slid the rail on the wall, cleared a room with quiet precision that told anyone watching that discipline and hope had linked arms. During a water break, he crossed near her file and said only, "Good work today," then moved on so the moment could live without weight. He wrote no speech about resilience, signed no citation that would flood her with attention she did not ask to carry, and instead returned to his office to steward the details that changed lives without stealing dignity. By noon, a message from the hospital portal showed a line through an old balance, the figure reduced to 0 by a donor labeled Community Fund. At the same time, a pharmacy app announced a copay covered by assistance. At her apartment mailbox, a plain envelope waited, just a gas voucher inside with a typed note that read for travel to appointments. Issued through a base program, nothing about origin or thanks required. When Caldwell saw the hospital statement, after evening chow, her breath hitched. She rechecked it. Then again, palms pressed to the counter as if the laminate could steady the ground. Jonah sat propped on pillows with a blanket patterned with rockets. Color returned to his cheeks by degrees, and laughter, small but present, when she tried a joke about astronauts who refuse bedtime. The cheap lamp flickered. She tapped it. The bulb steadied. The room took on a glow that felt like modest victory. The days that followed, leaves along Nelson Boulevard fell in slow gold drifts, and Fort Carson hummed with that autumn tempo where training sharpens before winter. Thornton kept the engine of help running in low gear, never loud, never visible.
Ow.
Each piece arriving at the margin where pressure relents just enough to let a person breathe. He met with the battalion S3 and quietly rewrote a duty roster to allow medical days without drama, then asked the first sergeant to circulate a list of resources with a note that read, "Use what you need and pay it forward when you can." He did not mention Caldwell. He did not need to. She began to sleep more than a handful of hours, and it showed in small ways first. Her cadence no longer drifted near the end of a run, and the miscount that had haunted push-ups dissolved. On the range, her groups tightened until the spotting scope returned the same calm pattern again and again. While Sergeant Ramirez muttered a satisfied good when targets flipped and stayed clean, Thornton watched with a pride that surprised him. By feeling quiet and clean, free of the old urge to shape the moment into a talking point, he texted his daughter between meetings and drove to meet her near Garden of the Gods on a Sunday that smelled like pine and hot rock, where they walked. A loop in easy silence before coffee turned into stories neither had made time to share. That afternoon, he returned to base lightened, not by rank, but by connection, and he filed that lesson where he stored every field trick that ever saved a life. At Caldwell's place, the dandelions in a jar surrendered to marigolds from a neighbor's patio, and the windows stayed cracked to let in crisp air-carrying leaf smoke and the far rattle of a passing train. She marked a clinic appointment on a calendar that finally had white space, penciled in school nights for Jonah, and stacked envelopes by type instead of emergency.